Hi, drawing students. Welcome to the new quarter. So for our first lesson this quarter, we're going to revisit for some of you and maybe introduce for others the idea of using graphite or pencil lead to create values and make a flat surface appear to be three-dimensional by using the values to create the illusion of a form. And the difference between a shape and a form is that a form is three-dimensional. And I went over this on another video that you'll want to watch about introducing use of pencil tools. So this will be on the Google Classroom, and it might be worth printing out and practicing if you're a beginner, if you want to warm up and haven't done this in a while. And all you would do would be to create the illusion of a 3D form by shading. And this is an ink example, but you'll want to use pencil. And go ahead and make the upper left be your light source. So it'll be darker on the right and go lighter on the left. So in the previous video, I talked about two different things to create lights and dark value. One is the pencil lead itself, the numbers and the letters, and these are the darker ones, the B's, and these are the lighter ones, the H's, and then you have the middle of the road ones. You want to be able to show 10 shades of gray, all the way from white to black. And for our purposes, we'll call 10 black, although this is kind of backwards, but, oh no, it isn't. Okay, number 1 is white and 10 is black. And then I talked about different erasers and also pressure. So pressure is a biggie. And you want to be able to create smooth transitions from dark to light. So this is another really good little exercise you can try. And it'll be on the Google Classroom. If you live near me, you can come by and pick one of these handouts up. But this is an example of what one of my high school kids did. And I made it easy for you. So I've got dotted lines to show the shape of the form. And you can use this to practice. And I suggested they make the background really as dark as they can to get rid of the outlines, because you don't want outlines. This one was just for fun. It's sort of a cylinder practice. You want to think of a can of something that you would never have in your pantry. This student got a can of eyeballs. So think about maybe a can of golf clubs, or a can of jelly beans, or whatever. And then you'll do that curving label that follows the curve of the cylinder, and write with curving letters what the object is that's in the can. It's a can of what? Okay, so one thing you'll notice right away is that, or I'll point it out to you if you didn't notice, is that curved forms have a gradual transition from dark to light. And this is a little more difficult. How are you going to go from the darkest dark and then lighter, 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 lighter? You can switch your pencil, but the biggest thing you'll be doing is changing your pressure and doing blending with a tissue or a tortillon. On a square object, one that has corners, wherever it changes angle, then you'll have an abrupt change in value. So you can look at things in your home, such as the door jamb will suddenly change from lighter to darker depending on how the light source is hitting it. So this has the light hitting on the top from the upper right, and then so this is the lightest. This is a little bit darker, and then on the dark side is dark. Also, you'll want to look at how the shape of the shadows look. A sphere will have an elliptical shadow. A cylinder will have straight lines and then a curve at the top. Cone and pyramid will both have triangular cast shadows. So you want to look at the shape of the cast shadow. On a cube or a box, it will vary depending on the angle it is and how the light's hitting it. But here's a cylinder, and it's got a rounded top, but parallel lines. And remember, the cast shadows are always more squished. They don't go all the way up to the top. They just go partially up. So kind of pay attention to that. So here's another box, and you can see light, darker, darkest. Light, darker, darkest. And that abrupt change from the whole face of this box is all the same value. You don't do a gradual transition. This is all one value. This is all one value. Same with a pyramid, because it has square corners and a triangular cast shadow. But now we get the cone, and here's where it's a rounded form. So you're going to go gradually, darkest to lightest. Sometimes you'll get what's called a reflected light on here, where the light might bounce up and actually be a little bit lighter, or in the case of something colored, you'll get a little bit of the color on there. And here's a ball, darkest, and then gradually going around, almost like a crescent moon, and the lightest on top. And here they are again. Okay, so you want to get good at creating that pencil value. And if you feel like you need a little practice, do one of those handouts so that you can get the accuracy. Okay, so I'm going to be using a vellum Bristol, which is one of the types of paper you can use. If you're using just regular white paper, just make sure it's a heavy, like 80 pound or something. And I'm doing it about this size. This is 11 by 14, but you can go smaller. Okay, so I'm going to actually, I just don't trust this surface. This has a little give to it, so I'm going to use the back of this as my surface. Just make sure whatever surface you use doesn't have a texture, especially if your paper's kind of thin. So what I did is I set up some things out on the patio in direct sunlight, so I had some cast shadows, and I'll put those on the Google Classroom for you to see, or you can use. It doesn't have to be just a cylinder in a box. It can be something like a garden sculpture or something, but I want you to choose something white, so you're not distracted by whatever value the color might be. So I've turned this box to a 2-point perspective, so you'll see the corner closest to you, and this will be going off in one direction, and this will be going off in the other. So these two lines here are going off to one vanishing point somewhere up there, and these two lines will meet in another vanishing point. And my eye level, you can see I'm kind of looking down on it a little bit. My eye level is high, so both of the vanishing points will be at my eye level. Depending on the angle you look at the cylinder, you will get an elliptical top that's more squished or more round. So this is what I'm going to be using. So the first thing I want to do is sketch it in pretty lightly and get the main form and kind of decide where I want it to be. And I kind of like this composition, so I'll use that. So I'm gonna draw an axis for this ellipse, and the curve is going to make the axis split it in half, and it's going to be horizontal. And the axis of the toilet paper roll, or the cylinder, is going to be at right angles to that, so it's going to be vertical. So these lines are vertical, and then whatever curve I have here is going to be repeated on the bottom. So I've got just a really light outline of the toilet paper roll. And then I have another ellipse right here, but you notice that this area is fatter than that because it is this section is in the center, but because we're looking at it in perspective, this is actually closer to us, and so this half will look fatter than that half. So I'm going to move it back about here, and it will be the same squishification of ellipse that this one is. So I think that's about right. Another interesting thing, we'll talk about this later on, but even though the light source is obviously coming from the upper left, do you notice that this any part is lighter than on the right than the left? It's because this cave is blocking the light. So it'll be kind of the reverse in darks and lights. Okay, and then we'll have this box, and it's overlapping a little bit, which is kind of a nice composition. So I'll start with this corner, and I do plan on doing a video just about perspective at some point this quarter. So, you know, I'm looking at about how far. It looks like it's about the same level. So I'll go ahead and add that little vertical line. Anything that's vertical in real life stays vertical in perspective. So even though my camera might have been tilted a little bit, this theoretically is vertical. And if we'd have seen that, that would be vertical. So I'm going to, since I don't want to do vanishing points on this, another thing you can do is just use your pencil as an angle finder. So I'll set my pencil right there. Make sure my paper is lined up with this, and see if I can replicate that same angle. And it looks like it comes up, you know, just about the bottom of it comes up just a little ways up, which is just about right. And then I'll use my pencil as an angle finder again and try and replicate that angle, make it parallel. Looks good. And then chop off my vertical. And then at some point, these two would be not quite parallel, because they're aiming toward a vanishing point. So this will actually be going a little at a different angle. But just make sure you don't have it going farther away, because then it would look like those two lines never meet. So maybe about like that. So I've got my basic outlines, and you notice I pressed really lightly, because we do not want any outlines showing when we're done. And that's what's going to make it more realistic. So I showed this on the other video I made about pencil. And so we want to go color right up to the line that's there and eat it up. And if there's any showing later on, like right here where it's white against white, that's a lost edge, so you would erase that. Here's another lost edge. Okay, so all lines should be erased when they're done. See, this student didn't quite have the ellipse just right. It looks a little pointy, and they also, for some reason, felt like they needed to outline, but it would have been better if that light gray just went right up to that, and that created the outline instead of, and here's a good example right here. And this. Okay, so I'll also draw in the cast shadows as it's on the photo. And there's no one rule for cast shadows. It really varies depending on where the light is coming from. Now I want to have this little twirl or fold. It's kind of like ribbons. Those of you that have been in the quarter where we did ribbons, it's going to twist around. And let's see. If you want to do any erasing at this point, it's kind of nice, since I'm really drawing real lightly, is to use just a kneaded eraser. So this part of the toilet paper, where it unrolls a little bit, will will have its own values. I'm not going to try and do the little Charmin details, but if you guys want to get into that, that would actually make it really cool if you were doing something like this, to get the texture in too. But the texture is the last thing you do. You always start off with the values. Okay, I'm going to erase some of these unnecessary lines in here. And I think it's easiest to start with the darkest value and go from there. Just, you know, it's a good idea to have something to protect your hand as you work, because it'll start to get all kinds of graphite on it. So I'm gonna grab a little piece of protector paper as I work and put that under there, especially once I start getting graphite on there. So I could start, if you squint your eyes, you can get a better idea of what that value is. But I kind of like using this value finder too. So I go right there and I say, you know, it's a white object, so you get fooled and you think, oh, it's not going to be very dark. But it's close to that, but I think it's actually, closer to that. So that's a number 7. It's only 3 away from a 10. And depending on your lighting, it could be really dark. Depends on the lighting in the room. Okay. So I'm going to start with just a number 2 pencil and see where I go. And push. In fact, you might be able to do the whole thing with the number 2 pencil. So I'm going back and forth, kind of coloring it in neatly like a coloring book. And it's a little darker right where that crease is, so I'll push a little harder. And you get some reflected light there. So maybe I'll take my tortillon, and you can actually saturate this tortillon with graphite and use this as a drawing tool. So I talked about using powdered graphite in the video I did about materials. So this is pencil lead that's just been shaved, so I can put a tissue down and wrap it around my finger and use that. And so I continue, and I'm getting lighter as I get over here. I'm going to decide where my whitest whites are, and it's going to be right here, this edge, and maybe right here and here. So this actually has a value almost up to the edge. Now here's where if I wanted to, I could use one of my H's. Like here's a 2H. And I can go back and forth and use really light pressure, and then always go in and blend it. So you don't have pencil marks if you want it to be photorealistic. So I'm going to take a Q-tip or a clean tortillon, because I don't want that dark value that's on this one to be on that. Here's one that's not. So I want to blend it a little bit. And another tool is an eraser. So I could actually go in and fill this all in and then use my kneaded eraser to erase out this little light here. Okay, so I continue to work, and I want to make sure that I get a nice strong protector paper here. I'm already starting to get nice strong dark on that edge, because this is, even though the cylinder is rounded, where it hits this, it gets a right angle plane and it changes planes. So it will be an abrupt line. And I've already eaten up that outline right there. So you can see I'm starting to form this. And I would get, this cast shadow is pretty dark, so I would want to go in and really hit that nice and dark with a dark pencil. And then blend it. Or just use my little, what I call a palette, my paintbrush. So you can see this is a slow process, and I'm not going to spend the whole video time doing this, but I like the idea of starting with the darks, and this is a definite dark in here. And I'm using a dark pencil. This is the Ebony, which is kind of like a 6B. Let's get in there with my 8B and go really hard pressure, because that looks like the darkest dark in that little cave. Now we have something colored here, so you have to kind of determine that value. Squint your eyes and say, is that darker than this white? And it looks like it is. So I would go in with a light pencil and create this value right here, and then blend it. Now on this, I told the students to use a really dark background, so I can change the table line and have it, you know, above, thinking about not having a tangent point here. I can have it right here, or even lower, a little bit lower, as long as this doesn't look like it's hanging off the edge. And then this can all be real dark back in there. So I could use my graphite stick and go in and push really hard. And also, I could definitely use some powdered graphite on this. And you can see then you'll have that nice strong white at the top, where the top of it is in light. And if you want to fade it away and sort of have it vignetted, you could lift up on the pressure as it moves away and keep it the darkest dark when it's really close. Once you do some blending with this tortillon, it becomes a drawing tool, and you can use it to show values. So here on the side of this box here, this is the dark side of the box. So I'm picking up, I'm not only blending the background, but I'm picking up some of the graphite to use here. So you don't always have pencil touching paper when you're doing this. A lot of times you can have you can have the tissue or the blender, and here I can go right in with the tissue wrapped around my finger. And if you overshoot it, you know, like you kind of mess up, then go in with your pink eraser or your white eraser, or what I really like is these little click erasers, and I can get a real fine sharp edge. I've got to dig out the brush that I have. You can just use a paintbrush, really. and just brush off the eraser crumbles. Okay, so you can see how it's forming. Now this is, the light was hitting lighter here and darker here, so I want to get a really light value on this part. So I could use my number 2 pencil, which is not real dark, and create my little palette right there. Wrap my tissue around and get a lighter value instead of that dark value I was getting right there, and rub that on. You can go over the edge and then go back in and erase. Get that sharp angle on the back, and when we talk about perspective a little bit more, I lost my tortillon. This, even though from the top it's a right angle, the one closest to you will, and farthest away here, will be larger than 90 degrees, and these two will be smaller than 90 degrees. If I got it a little dark, I might have to go in and lift it a little bit. So you keep using your tools. Oops, I didn't want to do that. To create your smooth values. I gotta go back in. Used the wrong palette on that one. Isn't it nice to see your teacher make mistakes so you know how to fix it? So I got to go back to this lighter section here and put that value in. And then this is going to be the lightest. Now, here you have light against light, but this is a little bit lighter, so there must have been some kind of shadow on it. But another little trick is to use your dark pencil or even a number 2 pencil and create a little skinny cast shadow where that cardboard box just doesn't quite hit the surface. So I don't want to have a line here. I want to just have value against value. But down here, as long as it looks kind of thin and thick and doesn't look like an outline, it could read as just a skinny cast shadow. And this is going to be, this is my 8B, so this is pretty dark. So I'm just kind of coloring this lightly, like a coloring book, and creating that sharp edge against the toilet paper. And eating up the outline, and then going in with my blender and blending that. So those of you that have done colored pencil, this is kind of like that colorless blender. It kind of helps to get rid of the tooth of the paper a little bit, make it smoother. So hopefully it's starting to form. I think it would be worth putting a light value around all of this and just go with a dark value, you know, just with the tissue, a darker value up on the top. So I would want to continue with my toilet paper tube roll. And it's looking a little darker here. And then blend. Or the option grab some graphite off your palette, your piece of paper that has pencil lead smoothed on it, and grab it off there. It's a good idea to erase your random lines before you start doing your values. You can kind of lift them so it's just a really light line and you're the only one that sees it. So here's that undercut where the tissue is folding over and creating a slight cast shadow here. Now, right where I made that line, I don't want it to look like an outline. So I'm gonna start to lift up on the pressure and kind of fade it away. Lighter pressure, lighter pressure. And then smooth it out. My hand protector and get this edge really sharp. And I'm sitting and looking at it from kind of an angle. It's a good idea to stand up every so often and look at it from an upper viewpoint. Now this value is darker than this, so I want to go in with I'll use my tissue on this, I think, and get a medium value. I'll do my HB, which is kind of like a number 2 pencil, and I'll wrap my tissue around my finger and get a somewhat light value. Let's see if I can get rid of these gesture lines here first. And then take my little click eraser and get that little line right there. Draw that in, and you have those little sharp highlights are really kind of nice. And there's another one over on this side. So light against dark, dark against light. Okay, so here's what I have so far, and you can see where I was going, I think. And I definitely want to work on this cast shadow and make it as dark as that. And I could probably go in even darker on this side and that cast shadow. So you make your decisions that way. Okay, I think I see this needs to be at a different angle too. Okay, anyway, have fun doing this, and it's very relaxing. Pick something quasi-simple. you know, the Taj Mahal is probably not a real good subject for this. So anyway, enjoy yourself.